Okay, so hello everybody, this is Sev, aka Bonier, and I have decided to do webcomic reviews. Yay! I've always wanted to do webcomic reviews for a very long time now, and now that I'm trying to get back into doing YouTube videos, I figure I might as well try it out rather than never try it at all. So recently I opened up webcomic review requests, and I'll be honest, it's been such a long time since I've really sat down and read a lot of other webcomics from other creators simply because I just don't always have the time. After doing this, I will say, and I've gotta tell you, there are some really good series out there. People are making really great stuff, and the major reason why I want to do webcomic reviews is that there aren't a lot of video reviews of, small indie. There aren't very many reviews for webtoons, webtoon canvas stuff, or just, webcomics that are on all kinds of platforms but just aren't getting a lot of representation. There's not a whole community, there's not a space for reviewing webcomics, and a lot of reviewers, from what I see, usually fizzle out doing it. It is exhausting, I get it. A lot of reviewers, by the time they review something, the comic is usually already on hiatus or is just dead. But I digress. I am going to try to do this, and I'm going to try to respond to as many of the requests that I got, but not in a particular order. I'm just going to try to do the ones that either speak out to me the most, or usually the ones that I know, like I have a lot of things to say that I can actually turn into content. So I would say that this first one that I am reviewing, called God Has Spite, seemed to appeal to me the most. This comic has two authors, Isaac Nutton and Ryan Animated. It was pitched to me as, it's a magical girl-inspired comic, but with grown men who have mental issues and trauma fighting in the name of God, and they all end up fighting each other. And I was like, wait, what? Hello, tell me more. Now, I've never really been too big on magical girl anime genres. I was never really into Sailor Moon or, what is it, like, called Pretty Cure? I mean, there's a bunch of different ones, like Tokyo Mew Mew. I wasn't really into those, but I noticed that during the years I was more interested, and I gravitated towards series that seemed to deconstruct the magical girl tropes, such as Revolutionary Girl Utena and Madoka Magica. So aside from the unique premise, what really draws me into this comic is definitely the art style. The character designs are really fun, distinct, and colorful. I can tell that the artists worked really hard on trying to make sure that all of the characters were distinct and you could tell them apart, and they had good shape language. Definitely the character design is a huge plus for this series. For this video, I am planning to do a very in-depth review, so some information towards the end might be spoilery. I will put a picture or like a timestamp when that is going to happen, when it starts to get spoilery. As of recording right now, it has 30 episodes, so it didn't take me too long to get through it. It was very easy to read and pretty fun, and I will have to say I definitely enjoyed this series, so I highly recommend you check it out if you can. So anyway, on to the synopsis. So, meet Larry, a 25-year-old bartender who feels suffocated with his normal life. His apartment is a mess, he doesn't have a great relationship with his landlord, and all around he feels his life is pretty mediocre. Well, all aside from one thing. He is a magical boy, and his powers have been bestowed upon him from God. God who actually seems to talk to him, because as it turns out, the third-person narration that we see in the white square narration bubbles, the narration is actually from God, from God's voice. And I'm not gonna lie, the actual conversations that he has with God is actually quite funny. Like this one scene where God is like, "Eat vegetables, Larry," and Larry's like, "Oh, well, they're too expensive, God," and God's like, "Well, maybe you should buy them in bulk, Larry, or maybe you should buy frozen vegetables, Larry," and I'm just like, and Larry is like, this is just normal to him, and it's just like wild to me. So one very interesting thing I noticed about Larry, he seems a little fanatical about his job as a magical boy. He's shown to sort of be the person that is incredibly invested in the idea of saving humanity and being dependent on and being the savior of humanity, which God tells him that he is. So he doesn't want to let God or the world down. And as we delve further into the story, we realize this has a whole lot to do with Larry's upbringing, with being seen as a failure by his parents and subsequently being disowned by them. So Larry's relationship with God. I want to talk about Larry's relationship with God. I guess the thing that got me very unsettled about and kind of piqued by Larry's relationship with God is, in the beginning, Larry is acknowledging that, and one of his biggest gripes about being a bartender is that he knows he's replaceable. You know, like we all kind of know, like people with customer service jobs and all sorts, I mean, jobs in general, right? We're replaceable. What really, really is messed up is that scene where, like, he complains once and then God is like, well, Larry, I can replace you, you know? If you can't do the job, then I'm just gonna get someone else. And it's like, oh, so not only is he replaceable as a bartender, he's also replaceable as a magical boy. And I'm just sitting there like, yeah, this is gonna turn out really well and probably not cause Larry to be like, I don't know, desperate to hang on to the only thing that brings him meaning into his life. No, not at all. That's not gonna be a problem at all. So the next section, I guess I could say, is like the world building of God Has Spite. And I won't lie, I'm usually a little bit intimidated by series in general that have a lot of world building to this extent, especially when it comes to like fantasy and like shonen animes in general, and even magical animes, but I see it a lot with fantasy and shonen. And you know how things can be in shonen, you know, you've got all these concepts and these powers and these leveling systems and these strange weird twists, and then they die and then they come back to life, and then they die and then they come back, and you have to keep up with all of this stuff. And it's just a little too complicated for a simple person like myself, but I will be honest, even with the amount of depth that this comic has, the main reason this video, that's gonna be the main reason why this video is so long. I literally have so much to talk about in just 30 episodes. And I also just wanted to make sure like I get all of the details so that I could also give the creators a fair overview of what I thought about basically the things that they included in the story. But to be honest, God Has Spite isn't as complicated when you get down to it, which I honestly really appreciated. I will say this comic does a good job at not flooding you with a bunch of information, and the pace that the story really unfolds is really carefully done. By the 7th episode, there's just so much I've already learned about the story, but it was actually pretty easy to follow. I think the fact that the story uses the narration of God as a guide, the comic does a really good job at explaining the world building. So basically, the world building, right, I just kind of went on, but the world building, or the world, there is this alternative realm called Abaddon, where the demons reside. When Larry becomes a magical boy, he goes into this realm of Abaddon and he kills the demons. However, God explains that Abaddon is approaching the earthly realm, and so the two of them eventually are going to merge. And when they merge, in this current reality, the demons are going to merge in with the earthly realm and overflood the earthly mortal realm. And basically, God cannot do anything about it. He can't control it. It's gonna happen. And although Larry is killing the demons and strengthening his magical powers, the demons can still multiply. So God tells Larry that he is the chosen one and will become the savior, but he has to prove that his skills are capable of guarding the world once the merge begins. But, so here's the problem with God saying that he's the only savior and that he's the only one who helped the world. Well, yeah, God's kind of lying in the story because, there's another magical boy. Scratch that. No, there are multiple magical boys. So what happens is basically there are multiple sections to Abaddon, and every magical boy has their own section. Larry is tasked to find energy fragments, and these energy fragments can be used to generate weapons, make you stronger, and then also locate other energy fragments. He decides to hop over to a completely other realm, which I guess which is a bad idea. He almost gets killed, but he is saved, and that's how he meets this new guy, Arch Navy, aka Haine, who saves him. So Haine, on to Haine, aka Arch. Arch Navy, I think it's Arch, I keep wanting to say Arch, but I think it's Arch Navy, aka Larry's rival. So meet Haine. He is a CEO of a charity. He is a little pretentious, sardonic, but maintains a professional attitude and maturity, just as you would expect of a 29-year-old charity company CEO. We don't know much about his charity company and what exactly they do. I mean, I'm like assuming it's some sort of nonprofit, and he still makes money because most nonprofits, the people at the top really actually do make money. But Larry finds out from watching the TV one day that Haine is actually working with Larry's estranged father, a lawyer, and his father actually considers Haine to be his own son, which really takes Larry off, of course. There's also just so much to Haine's background as well that we learn by the 30th episode, which I'll go into detail later. But it's really looking like Haine has a huge part to play in whatever strange mystery is going on with God and the magical boys and whatever else is going on in the story, because believe me, there is something going on. There's a lot going on. There is something. I want to know. So Haine's first impressions of Larry. He thinks that Larry is not serious, he's too reckless and childish, and to be honest, I can't exactly blame him. Sometimes I feel the same way. He considers this a serious job and Larry is not up for the task, so the next time we see him, he tells him he should quit being a magical boy. Due to God telling Larry that Haine wants to use energy fragments to hurt people, Larry fights Haine. It's during this fight that Haine finally tells him what's up and is like, no dude, I didn't even steal any fragments from you. I did nothing to you. I'm trying to be peaceful, but just because I'm rich, it doesn't mean I'm gonna hurt people. Like, damn! And Larry gets told. And I think after this exchange, the two of them come to a bit of a truce. Although it's really strange to see Larry suddenly warming up to Haine in this moment, at least we do have a point where Haine is kind of confused himself as to wondering why Larry did a complete 180 and is suddenly so attached to him. They don't quite team up right away, and even though Larry wants to, but after this you definitely get to see the two of them together, especially despite God's wishes. So by now in the story, we're getting to the point where we see that all these magical boys are fighting each other for these energy fragments. And now it's starting to feel like a shonen battle royale manga, so yeah! And things get really interesting from here, which, spoiler alert, this is where the spoilers begin, basically. So if this comic is starting to sound like something you'd be really up for reading, then I implore you to stop here and just come back once you've caught up. There's like a murdering clown on the loose, there's these scary, weird vortex people. Larry harasses Haine for a job at his charity company, but like Haine almost dies, goes into a coma and needs surgery. You know, the usual, and like the doctor is none other than this totally not suspicious guy named Tomino performing some experiments, I think on monsters. He was also like on good terms with the person who tried to kill him. So, the villains. The first one is Reithe, aka Glas, I hope I'm saying everything right, who is another magical boy. He's a famous model by day, another religious fanatic, and something about this scene where Reithe is talking about like God not liking lazy people and he doesn't want to be lazy and he works so hard, and then subsequently spilling hot coffee on the barista because she didn't use non-fat milk is something very telling about his character, I guess. So it looks like Reithe is also being manipulated by the same kinds of tactics, or the same kind of tactic that's being used on Larry, which is to prove he is the strongest. So to prove he's the strongest and gather all the energy fragments, except Reithe's message from God is a little different. Basically, he's told that when the merge happens, it doesn't matter how many monsters anyone kills. It doesn't matter. The Earth is going to go through a cataclysmic apocalypse and humanity doesn't stand a chance. However, if he proves himself as the strongest, he'll get to choose who he saves in the end, to which he plans on saving Tomino, who is... We'll get to Tomino in a second, but he's the doctor guy. Okay, so Reithe. I want to say it's like Reithe, but I think it's Reithe. It's a little sad, but you find out that Reithe was the oldest in charge of taking care of all of his younger siblings, while his parents just did not give a damn. They didn't cook for any of the kids, they only cooked for themselves. And they even had CPS called at some point, but like nothing happened. So Reithe doesn't mind letting the merge happen because this is like what he's kind of lived with. So he kind of has this idea that most people are disgusting anyway and a little bit misanthropic, and his real concern is just making sure the people he actually cares about are saved in the cataclysm. Whew. Okay, so moving on to Canary, aka Tomino. So Tomino is also a magical boy. He doesn't seem like he actually wants to be one. He's more interested in performing experiments and studying the monsters and also the other magical boys, and is on the side of whoever he thinks is going to win the War of the Worlds, he says. And in this case, he believes that that person is Reithe. So originally, I was actually wondering if Reithe was starting to fall in, not being as successful. I was wondering, I'm like, is Tomino the kind of guy who will like just switch sides because he's gonna go with whoever wins? But we get the confirmation that Reithe's feelings towards Tomino aren't one-sided and the two are in fact dating. So if Tomino actually ends up switching sides, well then, that would be super cold. Super, super cold. So Tomino is also the one who created the humanoid clown boy named Michael that is going around and murdering people. So, this is the same clown well, the clown thing that Larry and Haine fight around chapter 9 when they're in the castle. It seems as though he brought Michael back to life somehow. So I'm still trying to figure out what the whole deal is with him, and like, does Tomino know that his little Frankenstein child creature is, you know, I don't know, going around and murdering people en masse? No? Okay. Okay, so the next section is Larry's development. So around chapter 13 is the part where Haine is in a coma in the hospital and Larry goes and visits him. So in the beginning of the comic, Larry, honestly, to me, is a little immature, and I'm not gonna lie, despite being a 25-year-old guy, sometimes he comes off like a 16-year-old shonen protagonist. Not because of his youthful looks, but it could just be due to his behavior. So the big example being his back and forth with Haine and how he's usually really reactive to things. So I can't blame Haine for being annoyed with him, but Haine handles those interactions pretty well, and he usually is always de-escalating the situation, even when Larry is literally trying to fight him. I want to say that Larry's mindset could be the result of his upbringing. For example, we learn that his family was really rich. I guess apparently struggles to do chores because when growing up he had a maid basically do everything for him. He never went to an actual school. He was sent to a private business academy. He was also extremely pressured to perform well in school, so it could be the result of being too sheltered. Not like that, God wasn't helping very much either. He is always manipulating him. During Haine and Larry's argument, he's literally coming in his head and is like, "Psst, Larry, he's insulting you. OMG, you're just gonna sit back and take it? He's insulting you." It's like, you can definitely tell that a lot of the problems in this story are caused by the voice of God and manipulating people. But anyway, backtracking back to when Haine is in a coma, who he was put into by Reithe, who almost kills him. I really like this scene where Larry can actually admit the main reason he was so hostile towards Haine was because his father considered him as a son, and he was actually kind of jealous. And I'm like, you know what, Larry, good on you, taking some accountability. After this, Larry makes up his mind and decides not to abandon Haine because he wants to protect him, rather than being all tsundere and forbid there and like, no, he's not a friend. Just because he saved me a couple times doesn't mean I'm like, I like him or anything. I also really like how the more the comic goes on, we see Larry going into spirals of really negative thinking loops. For example, this point where Reithe, his fiance, shows up at his apartment, and after sending her away, he goes into this negative spiral about how much he hates her and hopes she dies. But it's really nice to see Larry steer himself out of that line of thinking and realizes that it's not good, it's not good to have these thoughts. And what he really wants is, he wants to save humanity, even if that means saving her. God, on the other hand, is seemingly confused by his logic, and I'm like, okay, it's about time I voice my opinion on God in this story, because in my opinion, I just feel like God is making a lot of shit up at this point. Because, for example, God is telling Larry that the reason he doesn't like Haine is because he foresees bad endings in every single interaction with him. Anyone who gets close to him is going to die. And I'm not really sure if he's telling the truth about that. So basically Larry is told that everyone that becomes close to Haine is fated to die, and that if Larry dies, then all life on Earth will cease to exist. It's just a bunch of manipulation, okay? It's just a bunch of manipulation. So another thing is Haine. So we find out more about Haine's past, and Haine, I think his father is called Patrick, and we see a flashback where his father is basically named him 1008, and I'm assuming that there's he has a bunch of clone sons, but he tells Haine that he's actually his real son, unlike his other siblings. And Haine apparently had to be a child soldier and fight all of his siblings to the death in order for them to train for Judgment Day. So yeah, dude, it is crazy. I'm telling you, that's why I was telling you, there's stuff going on. I mean, there's some clones. Haine's father is, cloned a bunch of kids and made them fight to the death. By the time we get to episode 20, we get a lot more information about Larry. So originally I thought that Larry was trans because in all of his flashbacks he was referred to as Amy. I don't know if it's Amy or Aim, but I think it's Amy. And I'm still not exactly sure if he is, but what we then learn is that when Larry's mother was pregnant, they might have been twins. And so what happened was one of them either died during the womb or one either died during childbirth. And so Larry was supposed to have a sister, and the sister was supposed to be named Amy. But because the child died, Larry's mother blamed him for her death. And so growing up, he felt like if he went by the name Amy, his mother, to comfort his mom. So it's interesting because his mother seemed to consider him as a girl. Like there's this one part where Larry's mom's asking where she is, where's Amy, and then, so I don't know if she was talking about Amy as like the dead child or Amy as like, Larry, I don't know. But interestingly, his father seemed to consider him as a son, and he was arranged a marriage with a girl named Reithe, but during the marriage, Larry refused it, and his father slapped him, and then he punched his father back, and because of this incident, he was thrown out of the house, and he was then forced to fend for himself. So actually, a recent update came out while I was editing the video, and oh boy, so it does give a lot more information in episode 31. We leave off where there is a strange, unsettling message being spread all over the TV, and some monsters are already being let loose in the city. Larry and Haine are fighting them off, and then Haine is able to kill one of the soldiers and pretends to be one of them in order to gain access to where the rest of the soldiers are. So while in this building, I assume this might be some sort of base or something, and he finds some humanoids and he kills them. And during this, he runs into a new character, Archangelo. So although Haine tries to shoot him, it doesn't work at all. And I'm not sure if Archangelo is supposed to be a magical boy, but he's certainly working with Haine's father. Then we find out from Angelo's explanation that the purpose of Patrick's army is to eradicate humanity once the merge happens. So they won't, I guess so that they won't suffer and get eaten by the monsters? I don't know. So obviously Haine has a problem with this, and this was probably what he already knew, and he was always against his father's cause from the beginning. So apparently it's all a part of God's plan, is to clean the world before the second coming. And then at the end of this episode we learn who Haine wants to kill, which is his father, which I'm pretty sure we kind of got that picture. But it makes sense. So in a way, it was the truth. He was trying to use the fragments to kill somebody, but in this case, it is supposed to be his father. So that is where we leave off in episode 31. Okay, so now I'm going to get into the critique section. So the major gripes that I have with the comic is really a lot of script, in my opinion, like a lot of dialogue could have been cut down. There tends to be repetitive dialogue, and in order for it to sound more natural, I feel like it would, if it was cut down, it wouldn't sound as clunky. And for example, in episode 24, Reithe is saying, "Your mom and dad's hearts broke the day you left. You mean so much to us. I know we've all had our differences, but if you just come home and apologize, everything can be fixed." I know that it seems like I'm harping, but if you change things to like, you broke your parents' hearts when you left, and you broke mine too. I know we've all had our differences, but if you just come home and apologize, we can work things out. Just something more like, rather than saying your mom and dad's hearts broke, with just saying you broke your parents' hearts. I think with just a little bit of editing, things might sound a little bit more natural. And for example, there's this dialogue in particular that skips to a bunch of different points, causing it to sound a little bit jarring. And I find that happens a lot in some of the dialogues during the comic. However, there are ways you can string things together that jump around and make them sound more like they complement each other. So for example, there's, in that same episode, and right near there's this other dialogue by Larry when he says, "You don't even care about me and you never have. I know all about how you were my parents' favorite person. You're not even related to me, so that's why they wanted you to marry me, so you could be around them all the time." So I kind of think if it had been changed to something a little bit more along the lines of, and it sounds a little bit more aggressive, but cut the crap. You don't care about me and you never have. Besides, you're the one who's favored by my parents, not me. That's the reason why they arranged our marriage in the first place. They wanted to have you around all the time. I mean, that could just be me, but I'm very particular about dialogue and how a lot of the times dialogue, I find in a lot of webcomics, they don't always sound very natural. And the best way for it to sound more natural sometimes is really to read it out and then try to rearrange things. Sometimes even cutting things out can make a better impact. And there's one more example that I can show. I know that's like, I feel like I'm harping so much on this. But it's mostly just because there was a lot of build up to this scene that you finally get to see Larry interact with his fiancée. And you know, what the scene was going to reveal. But, for example, this part, it really just feels like Larry is going on, and that's understandable because he's letting everything out. But I feel like sometimes maybe his words can make so much more of an impact, like especially at this scene where he says, "Actually, I've got one thing left to say. I'm happy Mom and Dad are miserable, and I wouldn't have it any other way. They deserve each other, and when they start using you to blow off steam, don't come crying to me about it. You dug this hole for yourself, Iva. Yeah, I figured it out. You want me to come back so they can start hitting me again." This scene could be, like, more impactful, like, especially with his expression, because it looks like one of those scenes where it's just like, boom, you know, it's just like, he's about to say something, and it's just like, like, just hammering it in. I think that they could be really tightened down to something like, Mom and Dad can just be miserable together for all I care. I'm glad they're unhappy together now. I know they're just frustrated because they don't have a punching bag anymore. Oh, actually, I just figured it out. You're the punching bag now, aren't you? So that's why you want me to come back so badly. So not those exact words, but as an example to tighten something up and maybe make it sound a little bit more like natural. So another thing that I have is the synopsis that's on the Webtoon page, because I think in a way that it can be reworked, it can definitely bring in more of the right interested readers. And I actually think the creators should consider using the same elevator pitch they gave to me when they asked for, or they submitted their comic for a request, which was the original pitch that was given to me, and I thought that was amazing. And I don't think you should probably, like, you don't have to use that exact same thing, but definitely you can use that in other places too. Like if you're putting your website up on some database, or you're putting it on a business card, or you're putting it on something like a little website card, you know what I mean? Like that is perfect in my opinion. You don't have to use it on Webtoon, but it's definitely perfect to use, and it is very interesting. Or you could also try to maybe meld it with it somehow, but I just felt that it explains so much about the series because I didn't even read the Webtoon synopsis before reading their comic on Webtoon. I just went straight into the first episode. So the one that's used on Webtoons is basically this. It is, Larry's a grown man with grown-up responsibilities, working a decent job, thinking about his many personal problems, and becoming a magical boy every night. With the voice of God as his best friend, Larry's tasked using energy fragments to become strong enough to handle an interdimensional merge destined to doom humanity. The only problem, there are other magical boys who want the energy fragments for themselves. So in my opinion, I think if you cut the part out about working a decent job, because as we see in the beginning, he kind of hates his job, and he doesn't like his job as a bartender. He's living in a crappy apartment. He's got a mediocre life. There is one thing he likes about his life. He is a magical boy tasked with being the savior of humanity from Judgment Day by collecting energy fragments. And there's just one caveat about that. There's more magical boys out there, and they're all after the same thing, the energy fragments, and will stop at nothing to obtain them. Traumatized magical men meet Battle Royale. To be a little more fair and provide at least some critique on the art aspect, I would have to say that there are times where the faces can be a little wonky in some areas and some anatomical wonkiness. Now here's my take about art in webcomics and why mostly in my reviews I'm not as critical with art as a reader of webcomics, because my main concern with art in webcomics is as long as the art is functional, I think that it's good to go. And by functional, I mean that I can tell what's happening as a reader in all of the scenes, and especially when it comes to the scenes where the characters' expressions deliver what the writing is trying to convey. And I think God Has Spite does that quite well. The thing is with webcomics, when it comes to the art, is that as the years go by, there's definitely going to be leagues of improvement. And I can tell already in this comic, I'm seeing improvements as the months have gone by for this comic as well. But that was really my only critiques, to be honest. I love the art, I think the art is great, and I even think the text bubbles, you know, people really sleep on text bubbles, but I think the text bubbles are really good. So now onto the section of, after reading the latest update, what are my theories so far and where I think the story is going. My theories thus far. Patrick, which I believe is Haine's father, might have some connection to this supposed god. Or maybe he is God, like maybe for some reason, maybe he's the one speaking to them somehow, like maybe they're like chipped or something, you know what I mean? Like maybe there's some like experiment, I don't know. Or perhaps he is fighting like against this god being, or in my opinion, in my theory, I think there are multiple gods and all of them have like one plan. Like they all need these energy fragments and they're using the magical boys to get the energy fragments, and for some reason they're all like conflicting with each other. Maybe that's the reason why everything is conflicting. So yeah, I feel like each magical boy is controlled by a different god. So where I see the story is going is like we just need all of the magical boys to realize that they're being messed with, they're being manipulated. So they need to eventually come to a a truce. They need to work together to fight against whatever system they've been made a part of. And I think whatever information Haine might have about Patrick, his father, he used to be a child soldier, or he was the one that was cloned, and whatever is going on with this army, I have no idea. Like, oh, there's also another thing. There seems to be some hints at some past magical boys. For example, this one who Reithe saw before getting his powers, and then there's also like some mysterious person that was in, like, his portrait was in the castle and he had some notes or something, I think. So yeah, so anyway, on to the last section, which is my overall thoughts. So honestly, I didn't expect to like the comic as much as I did, actually. Like, I thought it looked really cool, and I was like, ooh, I think I might be into this. But I am definitely, like, a huge fan now. Like, seriously, like, I'm in the fan club, okay? But, like, I also really like the slow burn romance aspect that we've got kind of hinting and going on. Not only with, like, Tomino and Reithe, like, they're actually a couple, but, like, I feel like eventually, you know, Haine and Larry might get together. I really seriously love how this story makes me feel, like, a little nostalgic, too. I'm not really sure what kinds of series or media the creators were inspired by when they were making this comic, but it definitely is, like, bringing me back to, like, 2010s anime, and I'm just really excited to see where the story is going. I'm loving the twists, and I just really, really hope the creators finish it, and I'm very, very, like, cheering y'all on, like, please finish it. I would say, like, my advice is, like, don't rush it. Take your time, be kind to yourself, don't overdo it. Because seriously, like, the creators started this last October. I mean, like, that is seriously a lot of work so far, so, you know, congrats to you guys, that's a lot. And also, my other advice is don't fall into the whole, let me redo my whole series trap. Like, don't do the reboot trap. Please, don't do it. This is advice to, like, all, like, Webtoon, like, any comic creators, like, web comic creators right now. I just really feel like only if it's necessary, things should be redone, you know, and I would probably start thinking about doing that, like, maybe 2 years into your comic, and even only then, I would say, like, redo if you're planning on, like, printing, or you're actually taking things, like, really seriously, and you know, like, it was a huge shift between the art, and you know that you would probably benefit from it. But, like, trust me, like, the whole, I'm gonna reboot my comic to the, you know, the whole, like, I'm gonna reboot my comic to the comic goes on hiatus because I have carpal tunnel now and the comic dies pipeline is, like, so very real. So I would just say focus on progress, don't focus on perfection. So yeah, so that's pretty much the whole thing, and I know this video is probably so long, and I would like all of my reviews to be this long, but I think it's really just the amount of pages that there are. I've gotten a lot of requests from comics that are kind of short, and I don't have a whole lot of things to say because I just really don't know what's happening. So I would say, like, my sweet spot is, like, that good, like, 10 episodes to, like, 30 or 50. I've gotten a lot of good stuff. Like, I'm actually genuinely enjoying what I've been looking at, and it's very nice. And so I really hope with doing reviews that, like, I can kind of get people who also aren't creators, who also just to open their minds a little bit and just kind of realize that there's a lot of stuff out there. And I think the problem with, like, Webtoons and Tapas and a lot of webcomic platforms is that there's just so much, and it's overwhelming. There's literally just so many comics. It's difficult, but it's also the fact that webcomics don't have a huge community. There's not, like, an actual community of readers who actually want to talk about what they're reading. There's no place to talk about it. And I think in that segue, I'm gonna, like, segue real quick, and I'm gonna talk about Inkverse. I'm not sponsored, but I recently got made aware of this place called Inkverse, and it is a place where you can put your comic up, and I highly recommend you check it out if you're a reader or if you're a webcomic creator. They basically are trying to create almost like a podcasting, kind of like what they had with podcasts with, like, Anchor FM and stuff, and how basically they're trying to put webcomics on different, like, you put them on their app and then it goes into other apps, and you can get different readers from that way, and they also want to have, like, a community aspect on their reading app so that readers can actually recommend stuff to each other, they can talk about stuff. That's something that Tapas and Webtoons doesn't have. And also they want to be able to connect you to, like, to a website so that you can also get you know, Patreon revenue or unlock things like, you know, like Webtoon Fast Pass and stuff. And so I highly recommend creators kind of look into putting their webcomics on other places, because I saw a lot of benefits in my own experience with putting it up on multiple places, and it really is aggravating, but it's definitely good. Yeah, but like I said, hopefully, and I'm hoping Inkverse becomes grows in the next coming year, and that we see other growths and developments, because I do believe that a lot of creators need to consider to stop putting all their eggs in the Webtoon basket, and I think that there's definitely a different way to get what you want, and definitely to think about what you want out of your webtoon. I think that the goal of having it as an original is not a productive goal. I think that there needs to be a more structured and a more realistic goal with what you want out of your webtoon, and the different paths and the different avenues that you can take your comic. So yeah, that was a different segue. I'm sorry I took it away from God Has Spite. I took away your shining spotlight. But yes, okay, that was God Has Spite. I highly recommend you read it, especially if you are into that kind of thing. And other than that, technically I'm still taking requests. I might just have like a Google survey or something to put them up, but I can't guarantee that I'm going to get to every comic that I get recommended. There are some I'm definitely putting on my watch list, and I'm watching them grow as they update, and then I'm basically like putting a bunch of notes, and I'm trying to see like what I can say about some of these things. But with that being said, that is God Has Spite, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!